Okay, this is a shorter session, 30 minutes. Hopefully we'll have two presentations of about 10 minutes-ish. But we'll certainly have a very interesting, well-packed out session, and I'm going to hand straight over to Rod to get started.
Cheers, Andrew. Got a very snappy title, moving on from tutor-provided screencasts, which is something that I've been doing for about eight or 9 years now, to getting students to produce formative, reflective screencasts of their own. I think you could sort of describe that as just changing the emphasis, really, of what the screencasts are being used for. I need to give you a little bit of context about this. I teach on our institutional postgraduate certificate and masters in academic practice. So my students are really my colleagues. And I teach primarily a unit called Enhancing Learning and Teaching Assessment with Technology. We shorten it to ELTAT. It's a 30-credit unit, runs over about 12 weeks. And it usually follows a sort of a flipped classroom type model. The participants are set tasks which they hopefully undertake before coming to a classroom session. There's then an online follow-up activity based on discussion and activities that take place in the session. Then they receive individual personalised feedback, because all of the tasks are in the context of their own learning and teaching. So we ask them to review their current practice, think about how technology might fit into it, and all of the time it's in the context of their own teaching. So the feedback needs to be very personal to their own subject area and their experience of teaching. And that pattern repeats throughout the course. These sort of feedback activities, lots of different formats, usually written submissions, or until recently they were written submissions, but we demonstrated lots of different feedback techniques, so audio feedback, written feedback, use of rubrics, but also the use of video screen captures, which is what Andrew had asked me to talk about today. I'll just say a little bit about the rationale behind using screencasts. One of the tasks that I get people to do is to produce a learning teaching assessment matrix, which is a way of visualising constructive alignment on a programme. So you've got learning outcomes in this column here down on the left-hand side. You've got the methods of teaching and methods of assessment, formative and summative along the top. And this matrix is basically an opportunity to think about your course and how do I address this particular learning outcome? How do I teach it? How do I assess it? And it's a really nice way of doing some sort of gap analysis to make sure that everything's joined up and aligned. And it's obviously, there's a visual element to it, because you're looking for gaps, you're looking for patterns, you're looking for maps. So when I started to provide feedback on this, first thing was to annotate it, get the students to hand it in physically and annotate it. That really is my handwriting. Sometimes I can't read it. It's a terrible thing. So as I started to think about this, the students are submitting this electronically. Let's get with the programme. Why don't I make use of the inbuilt tools and I'll start to add my comments in a legible way. Turned out to be much quicker because they were submitting it online. Just annotate the document, send it back. Then I thought, well, sometimes I have difficulty in articulating, because I usually do a little feedback summary here. What is it that I'm talking about? So I'd be saying things like, if you look in the second column, the third row along, you'll see that I've made a comment about such and such. And I was finding I was writing more about where to geographically locate yourself than I was actually saying the feedback. So I felt I was wasting words, if you like. So what I started to do was to use, at the time it was a Camtasia, but I'm now using an institutional provided system called BB Flashback. And this is the kind of thing that I do.
And Gary, it's right here with some feedback on your learning teaching assessment matrix review of your current provision. Just in terms of the overall purpose of the feedback this time, not really, what we're going to talk about is trying to give you some ideas as to how to use this tool to its best effect. So in that respect, one of the things that I would say is that it's maybe useful to add some detail about the timing of your assignments to the mock exam. So you've got your formative and summative assessment columns here. You're not sort of articulating a great deal of detail about how these things work in practice. So, are these purely formative assessments, or is there any kind of summative mark associated with them? And it looks to me like there possibly might be with some things.
So a couple of things, just to point out there, that I'm able to make a personal connection with the student. I can say her name. can tell her who I am, and that makes a difference straight away. You make a connection with them. Other things that I can do, it's very easy for me to orientate myself around the screen. I just point the mouse at it, it's highlighted. And I can also go into more depth about the comments that I've made on there. And I can do that really quickly. And I found it a really powerful tool to give quite a lot of feedback in a relatively short space of time. I've done quite a bit of time and motion studies on this, and I can produce equivalent amount of audio feedback in about half the time that I can produce written feedback, because I'm not a natural writer. It's much more of a challenge to me to write things down than it is just to say them out loud. We've done some evaluation on this, just in terms of the participant experience. Participants tell me that they prefer audio and video feedback to written feedback, at least for this kind of task. This kind of task has got a visual component, and I think they identify with that. They tell me that the annotations are important because that helps them to orientate themselves. They find it personal and engaging, and also they describe this notion of it being more understandable. It comes more naturally to their understanding because it's in a spoken way than in a written way. I think a combination of the delivery model that we're using, where the emphasis is on doing things online and bringing stuff into the classroom to use it, and the types of feedback that we're providing account for the fact that we've got probably one of the highest attendance rates on a PG Cert programme of 95%. And I'm getting an 85% plus submission rate for these summative tasks. There's no marks associated with them at all. So I think that's pretty good. And in fact, in recent courses, I've been getting about 95% submission rates. So, one of the things that I also ask the participants to do is a 100-word written reflection themselves on their LTA matrix to outline what they think they've highlighted or they've identified by undertaking this particular task. I find that these short reflections are often very descriptive. They tell me what they've done. They're often quite superficial. I'm going to add something that's formative, but they don't explain what they mean by formative. They don't go into any depth. And they have relatively the same problem as me. I've added a weekly quiz. You can see it in the third row, column 2, on line 3. And they waste up a lot of space trying to orientate me to the point that they're trying to make. So, Spice Girls reference, I thought, stop right there. What you want to do, Rod? What you want to do, Rod, is spice up your life. Don't keep this to yourself. Time to stop. And I thought, why don't I get students to do these screen captures? We've got the technology on the institutional standard platform now. It's available to staff and to students. Maybe the experience of doing this might allow them to build it in more to their teaching. So, roughly, what I now do is I get them to submit the initial matrix as a Word document, and I provide an annotated Word and video screencast as feedback. Then we have another sort of 3 or 4 weeks where they get experience and opportunities to reflect on technology which is available to them at MMU, and we use various other feedback techniques like written pro formas and audio feedback. And then in week 6 we give them some hands-on training, and we spend some time with them showing them how to make recordings using BB Flashback, which is the screen capture technology we have at MMU. And then the follow-up task that week is to produce a screencast explaining and reflecting on a revision of their matrix based on the experience that they've had over the past 3 or 4 weeks. They submit that to me, we watch them, and then we record. We do a little bit of audio recording because there's no easy way of putting the feedback onto the video screen. Apart from we've just discovered a really nice tool which was originally called Big Red Pen, which didn't sound like a particularly good name for a feedback tool. But I think they're calling themselves Annotate Assess now. And what they do is they submit the video and you can annotate onto the video timeline, so you can provide feedback on the timeline. So hoping to have a look at that next week. Just to show you the kind of things that we get from students.
Firstly, apologies that this is being submitted rather late. I do realise there's no way you can report back on this before.
So I've got a rapport with this student. She's apologising for the fact that she's given me a bit of extra work. That doesn't usually happen in my experience, but it's quite nice.
For tomorrow's session. I've gone over my matrix. I've added in some of the detail that you'd suggested.
much more apparent to me straight away what she's done in response to the feedback that I've provided. I'm starting to get an impression here of how my feedback is having an impact on my students, and that's something that I don't often get from written stuff.
Just thinking about putting in some more information around what the assignments cover and the type of questions in the assignments. I've added in an extra column for the online bits of information that I'm going to put on. I've decided to stick with the mainly face-to-face teaching because I am aware that one of the reasons that the students come to us in particular as opposed to going to one of the other professional providers is because they like the face-to-face teaching.
So that's something that we don't often get as well. There's an anecdote in there. There's a sort of a quality and depth to the reflection which is much more realistic. So I found it to be quite sort of revelatory, really. It just started off, it seemed like an interesting idea to get them to experience making a video screen capture. But when we've looked at it at some transcripts in detail, we're finding that in comparison to written reflections that we were getting before, what we're seeing now is more detailed, it's developmental, and we're much more aware of what the development actually is. It's certainly much more reflective, and the reflections are deeper and more obviously reflections, I suppose. Very, very easy to relate to the matrix tool. They don't waste a lot of time on orientating themselves. And it's conversational over a few iterations, because we've started to do this for a few things now. It's starting to build up a dialogue. I'll ask questions in my video, they'll respond to those questions and might even pose their own questions, or certainly follow them up more in classroom sessions as well. So from something which sort of started off as being really a technical thing, we wanted them to have a go at making their own videos, suddenly realised what I've got here is a tool that I think can improve the quality of reflections that you get on any kind of student work. And what we're hoping to do is to follow this up with some undergraduate students next year. The other thing that we've done on this particular programme is the summative assessment for the unit is they produce a plan for implementing technology-enhanced assessment in their own teaching. So that's a design document, and then we used to ask them to do a 1,500-word written reflection. What we now say is you can do a 1,500-word written reflection, or you can do a 15-minute video essay reflecting on the same stuff. And what they're doing is they're capturing pictures of their design, pictures of their Moodle area, and they're reflecting on it in I think, a very different way. And we want to do a little bit more exploration of that in future. Okay, that's me.